Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about kind of an interesting subject in the sense of like destined enemies starting off as friends. Now, what I mean by that, I don't mean something simple like, you know, someone who obviously these people were kind of friends, but they were sort of rivals and then maybe they became enemies. Not like a Naruto and Sasuke thing. It's a situation that I feel like it's very unique in the sense of something like Smallville, where you have Clark and Lex being friends actually. Now once again, I don't know comic books, I literally always have to add that, but to my knowledge, like that prior to Smallville, that was never a thing. Like it's almost just like always, there's always eventually like Superman and Lex always being enemies, but then Smallville kind of turned that around and it's like, oh my god, this is like a younger Clark and a younger Lex being friends. And the reason why I say that situation is so unique, obviously there have been tons and tons of like Superman comic books at that point in time. So there's this established history between Superman and Lex Luthor, but then you have this one storyline that takes that and kind of twists it a little bit of like, oh man, because it adds this whole element of almost destiny, and always like that kind of in stories, like it's a combination of destiny and nature. It's like could things change if they started off friends? Would they always ultimately go to where they're supposed to be, where it's like they'll ultimately always be enemies? Which obviously that shows that no matter what, they were always going to end up enemies on the opposite side of things. That, I mean, but then I talked about nature, but I'm like, is that because he's a Luthor, or is it, you know, just Lex himself? You know, like, is there any way to change your destiny, like in that type of situation, or is everything just kind of written in stone? I know, like, that's kind of getting all like too like meta about it because of the comic books and everything, but still, it's just kind of an interesting conversation to me, because I feel like that was the first time I'd ever seen something like that before. You guys literally grow up to be mortal enemies, that you just have always been mortal enemies, and then this one material has you being friends. And once again, I don't know, maybe there's other comic books that existed prior to Smallville that had something like that, but to my knowledge, it always seemed like just a one-off thing for Smallville, like nothing else. Maybe subsequent stuff has kind of introduced that concept in the comic books, like when it comes to like Superman's story. I mean, because really it wasn't just Lex, it was just like a culmination of just so much stacking upon itself, leading them down to the path that, you know, like Clark keeping his secrets, and just like I said, Lex struggling with his darker nature and stuff like that, his nature as a Luthor. I mean, even his dad kind of turned things around, like storyline wise, but obviously I won't get too much into that for anyone that's never seen Smallville, because it's like literally Clark had everyone be like, nah, I don't trust Lex, he's a Luthor. There's other people around him that started getting kind of close to Lex too, but then even that turned into a situation of like, yeah, stay away from Lex, he's kind of evil. Like, it was to that point, and even Clark was like, no, Lex is his own person, so it turns into that thing. It's actually interesting because Supergirl kind of continues that canon, because like certain aspects of Supergirl, like when they talk about like the Superman canon in that universe, it kind of seems like it reflects Smallville a little bit, which is kind of interesting. But they even talk about the fact is that, like, because obviously in that universe, like Superman's been an established thing, and like they already talk about Lex already being in jail and everything, and he's kind of become the supervillain that he's in. It's like everyone's like, oh, Lex Luthor is crazy, so the Luthor name has been like run through the mud because of that. Because there's even conversations like, oh yeah, Lex and Superman used to be best friends type of situation. Well, in particular Clark, not just Superman. I don't know if that's ever been a thing, like Superman himself and Lex being friends. Because an interesting thing is that Supergirl kind of does a similar thing, because Kara is friends with Lena, Lex's sister, which that kind of plays into that whole thing too, because Lena kind of struggles with that, because she has her mom being like, oh, you were a Luthor, you're a Luthor, but she wants to fight it. She wants to fight what she believes is kind of her natural nature. And so, like I said, it turns into that whole situation of nature and destiny. Like, are you always meant to be this way, or can you change? Like, or do you not have to be bound by who your name, your nature? Do you have to be bound by you or your own person? You know, I mean, ultimately, that always comes down to the writers and stuff like that. Like I said, I know I'm thinking about it too much, but it's just kind of an interesting thought to me, because even at this point in time, you can see that Lena is struggling with that. She's been struggling with it since like last season, you know, in season 2 of Supergirl when she was introduced. I mean, once again, like, it's hard to really get away from the fact is, it's like, oh yeah, you're Lex's like sister. It's like, yeah, oh, you're a Luthor. It's hard to kind of get away from that. Even Jimmy couldn't kind of shy away from his bias, because it's like, oh, like, Kara, don't get close to her, she's a Luthor. And, you know, because he was around during those, like, you know, I mean, everyone heard about, you know, Lex, but I'm sure he was like around like Clark during those times. And it's like, oh yeah, like her brother tried to kill like my best friend on multiple occasions. Kind of in that same vein, there's actually the Telltale Batman games that kind of do a similar thing where they actually set up the Joker, or rather John Doe, and Batman, because these are the earlier times for both of them. This is before John becomes the Joker, because it's kind of an aspect of him where it's like, oh, he hasn't found himself yet, because he gets introduced in season 1 of the Telltale Batman games, and then like kind of plays a bigger role in season 2. Obviously won't go too heavily into spoilers for season 2, because even I don't know the full story of season 2, but obviously I saw little clips of things enough to be like, okay, so it turns into that thing too. But they set it up where it's like John is actually your friend and everything, which is always interesting about that, because it actually caught me off guard, because I thought John knew about Bruce being Batman, because he was basically like in season 1 he was kind of like, oh, I know there's something more you can do about it, there's a darkness in you, Bruce. I was like, oh, so he knows about you being Batman. It's like, no, he knew about the darkness in Bruce just because of like the whole Wayne storyline in season 1. Obviously we won't go into spoilers about that, but in season 2 he meets Batman. He's like a huge Batman fan, which is so interesting, because it's like, not only is he besties with Bruce, he's like a huge Batman fanboy, which I like was an aspect. Once again, that's a little bit of a hairier situation, because it's like, well, Telltale is like, you kind of, the story kind of adapts to your own choices, so you kind of mold the story yourself. But to be fair, it's like, well, there's only so far like with the Telltale formula where you could stretch out. Like I said, I don't know the full limits of just how things can like branch out, especially when it comes to that, but you could literally push like Batman as well as Bruce to being friends with the Joker. And to me, it's like, those are literal mortal enemies. That is like Batman's #1 nemesis. And to be fair, especially like some of the stuff that Joker's done to him all across Batman canon, well, let's not forget the Jason Todd situation. Like, that's a #1 reason to be like, wait, what? To be fair, like, the whole Robin situation isn't established in that universe, at least, like I said, to my knowledge. So in this particular canon of Batman, so it's just kind of interesting to me. And there was actually one I found last night. I do apologize, these are all DC stuff, because they're like the ones I can pull from. They're the ones I know well enough to kind of talk about. But last night, Krypton premiered on Sci-Fi, which I really liked. It brought up a lot of interesting things, and one interesting thing is that Clark's grandfather, or rather Cal's grandfather, Say, was in love with Lyta, who's a Zod. I don't like where things are right now. This is kind of spoilers, but maybe it won't be as big of a deal because it's coming out like Friday. But they kind of break things up, but obviously it's not going to be over, because even the commercial is kind of, because even the person behind the show is kind of like, yeah, I had to set it up as kind of like Romeo and Juliet in space, which that's kind of interesting to me that that's even a thing, because also I didn't even know, because I don't really know that much about Krypton's history and stuff like that. I kind of talked about in that episode. I've learned a little bit more here and there because of that, as well as because of Supergirl, but I'm not familiar with the other like big families on Krypton, and I didn't know like the Zods were like an established thing like the Elves were. It's a whole thing. But that means, holy crap, like there's mingling right there, like I said, a Romeo and Juliet thing, considering like where Clark and Zod are. Like, I mean, they're kind of friends in a certain sense, because like Zod was kind of like one of, like, at least in Smallville, it's like, oh wait, you're like one of the only other Kryptonians I mean other than like Kara and Zod and some of the other Kryptonians, they're the only ones that survived Krypton's destruction, so that's why there's a bond there too. It was never a thing in Man of Steel, obviously, just because it's like, oh, you came to like terraform this planet, I'm not gonna join you type of thing immediately. It was never like a friendship. But Smallville kind of started off as a friendship, and then I'm like, no, I can't trust you. You're up to some nefarious stuff type of thing. So, like I said, once again, I do apologize for these all being DC stuff. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's just like they're the only references I'm pulling from. Because of that, I am curious for you to let me know your thoughts about all of that. Like, do you know any other examples like that? And like I said, not just a rivalry situation, but it's like it's already an established history. Like, maybe it could be other comic books or something that have something like that. Other like superheroes that kind of have a similar thing where it's like, oh, these characters, like they were like in another media, whether it's a video game, TV show, or movie, whatever the case may be. It's like, oh, these mortal enemies in a comic book were later on turned to like, oh, they started off friends. Either they kept their friendship and never turned mortal enemies, or that they do like start off as friend and become mortal enemies, kind of like, you know, the Lex and Clark example. I guess like a different kind of vein type of situation of kind of what I'm explaining is like the Jessica Jones situation I'm talking about with like the Netflix shows. It's like in the comic books, like Jessica and Luke are heavily established thing, but currently where they're both at, they're in relationships. So I constantly keep going like, oh man, that's awesome, your relationships, but I'm like, aren't you ultimately going to get together? You know, because in my mind, like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage is kind of like the same thing as like Peter Parker and Mary Jane. But then again, it's like, well, then there's Peter Parker with Stacy. But then it's like, well, maybe it's more like Clark Kent and Lois Lane, you know. But nevertheless, that's just me. Maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe it's a situation they never get together. That's just kind of a whole thing in itself. So I don't know why I added that, but it's there. Like, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.